Hi, this is our prologue and chapters 1 and 2 of Gordon Corman's book 2, Survivor with Island. On the beach of the small coral island with no name sat all that was left of the schooner Phoenix. It was a tiny wooden raft 6 feet long and not quite 4 feet wide, and had once been the roof over the proud ship's galley. Now it was scorched by fire, battered by weather, and encrusted with sand and sea salt. Barely visible through the battle scars were 3 letters, N-I-X. The rest of the Phoenix name, along with the ship herself, lay at the bottom of the deepest part of the Pacific Ocean. On this piece of flotsam, 4 young people had bravely 7 days and nights at the mercy of the sea. Their captain was gone, drowned. The mate had deserted them, leaving them to die. 2 of their companions were lost without a trace. Close to death from hunger, thirst, and the blazing sun, the 4 survivors had ridden the wind and waves. 3 of them were in a desperate condition, the 4th deeply unconscious, when they washed ashore on this rugged cay 6,000 miles west of Los Angeles, 1,100 miles south of Tokyo, and 900 miles east of Hong Kong. It was a tiny dot in the vast ocean, a dot that appeared on no maps, overlooked no shipping lanes, and was observed by no passing aircraft, an island with no name. Chapter 1, Day 1, 4:45 p.m. They had survived 40-foot waves, an explosion and fire at sea, and a week adrift on a tiny raft. But now Luke Haggerty, Charla Swan, and Ian Sikorsky faced their greatest challenge so far, a coconut. It had fallen off a tall palm, missing Luke's ear by inches. To 3 people who had put nothing but rainwater in their stomachs for 7 long days, it represented what they needed most, food. Charla, the city kid, turned it over in her hands. "Where's the opener on this thing?" "What do you expect?" Luke shot back. "A pull tab?" It was a joke, but it was underscored the tension and fear in the group. Will Grinfield, the 4th survivor, lay unconscious and unmoving on a beach not far away. He needed medical attention. Probably they all did, but they were far from any doctor or hospital, stranded on a what? And if it had been an island, but how big an island and where is anybody's guess. Be grateful, Luke reminded himself. You're alive. But he was not grateful. Captain Cascadian wasn't alive. Lysa Greenfield and J.J. Lane weren't alive. Luke felt their absence in his every breath, an overwhelming sadness that weighed on him as heavily as exhaustion and dehydration. What was so special about Luke that he deserved to live when others had perished? Why was he still here? Good luck? Or maybe the luck wasn't good after all. The hunger felt more powerful than death. Forget hunger pains. Luke hadn't felt those in days. Instead, there was a grinding, hollow emptiness where his stomach should have been. The sensation was so intense that it seemed to go outside the limits of his skin. With it came a nervous, trembling weakness that was going to get worse. And here was this coconut. "You have to break it," explained Luke, banging it on the damp ground. "You have to get through that tough skin." He snatched up a rock and began bashing it against the greenish shell. "It takes patience." He picked it up and hurled it at a tree. "Open, you miserable rotten!" It bounced off with a thwack and hit the ground unbroken. Ian spoke up. "I once saw a documentary about native tribes who could crack coconuts with their bare hands." "Did you bother to find out how they did it?" Luke said irritably. Ian shook his head. "That was part 2. They showed it the night I left for this trip. The three exchanged a sickened look. It was hard to believe that barely 2 weeks ago they had been safe at home packing for charting a new course, a month-long boat excursion meant to help troubled youth. Charla sounded highly hysterical. "It's like starving to death at Thanksgiving dinner," she cried. She picked up the fallen coconut, spun around, and hurled it like a discus into the jungle. Crack! "It broke," exclaimed Ian. "I heard it." They rushed into the dense trees, but their coconut was nowhere to be seen. Vines and underbrush snatched at their legs. Luke grabbed a branch and began whacking away at the tangle. The coconut, the food, it had to be down there somewhere. He began to flail wildly, like a crazed golfer in knee-deep rough. He roared in anger. It was stupid, he knew, a waste of valuable energy when there was so little left. But his frustration mixed with his hunger, and he didn't care, couldn't help himself. "Luke!" Charla grabbed him from behind. "Stop it! It's only a coconut." "Guys," came Ian's excited voice, "over here." They followed his call to a small grove of leafy tropical trees and shrubs. There, the younger boy was gathering an armload of strange green fruits that had fallen to the ground. Charla wrinkled her nose. "What stinks?" "These are durians," Ian explained breathlessly. "They have a strong odor, but they're food." He broke one open against a tree trunk and handed half to Luke. The powerful smell tripled. Luke stared at it. "You're kidding, right?" The thick skin was covered in spikes. It looked more like a deadly weapon than a fruit. Charla accepted a piece, handling it as if it might explode. "But how do we know it isn't poison?" Ian plucked out a gigantic seed and began to eat the grayish mush around it. "There was this documentary on TV," he begun, mouthful. Luke and Charla locked eyes. They had learned from experience that Ian was never wrong about something he'd seen on television. His stockpile of knowledge had saved their lives more than once on the raft. They fell on the offering like starving sharks. It wasn't good, Luke reflected. It wasn't even acceptable. But in his voracious hunger, he barely noticed, gorging himself on fruit the consistency of gritty pudding, but with an odd, garlicky flavor. Back home, he wouldn't have given this stuff table room, but here he ate greedily, even crunching the rock-hard seeds because Ian said they needed the protein. The feast soon turned into a frenzy. After no food for so long, once they started eating, they couldn't stop themselves. The three stumbled around the grove in a fever of appetite, tripping and falling over the dozens of discarded rinds, even as they rushed to break open new fruit. The rough spikes scratched their knees and shins, yet none of them felt the sting. Nothing mattered, nothing but the breathless race to get to the outside of as much nourishment as humanly possible. As he stuffed himself at long last, Luke could feel his stomach again, back where it belonged and comfortably full. The sensation came along with something unexpected, sudden, overpowering, sleepiness. All at once, his eyelids were so heavy he couldn't keep from closing them. Drowsy panic. Had they poisoned themselves? The others must have experienced it too. Just before he lost consciousness, he heard Charla say, "God, what did we eat? I can't stay awake." Seconds later, the three of them lay motionless, the remnants of their feast still scattered around them. Chapter 2, Day 1, 10:50 p.m. Locker inspection. It flashed before Luke's eyes in a series of still pictures. The assistant principal flipping through his untidy collection of books and sneakers. A pause to wave those sweaty gym shorts to everybody in the hall. The guy was a real comedian. And then a small hard shape in his wadded up backpack. Stubby fingers drawing it out. A .32 caliber pistol. "It's not mine, Mr. Sazel." Even now, lying unconscious in the jungle of a deserted island 9,000 miles away, Luke protested his innocence. "Somebody framed me!" And just like that, it had happened in real time. He was not believed. The rush began, the trial, the choice, 6 months in Williston Juvenile Detention Facility, or a program called CNC, charting a new course. 4 weeks of sailing aboard the Phoenix, a majestic schooner, where he would learn discipline, cooperation, respect for the law and order. The images changed. He could hear the tremendous explosion, feel the hot wind of all the blast on his face, see the approaching wall of fire. Something sniffled, and it wasn't an explosion. Luke awoke with a start. It was so dark that for an instant, he thought he was back on the raft. A sliver of moon provided the only light. Then he saw the creature. It was just a few inches away, staring back at him with glowing red eyes. Luke gasped in shock and revulsion. Instinct told him to back up, but flat on the ground, he had nowhere to go. The beast retreated a couple of steps, snorting and puffing. It was 4 feet long, seemingly all head and bull neck, and a body that tapered for 2 short legs and a tail. On either side of the flat snout curled small, gleaming white tusks that gave the animal the appearance of sporting a well-groomed mustache. A boar, Luke thought, a wild boar, and he was lying there, helpless. All in one motion, he rolled away and scrambled to his knees. The boar was startled and thundered into the jungle, its massive head pumping up and down like a piston as it ran. Luke squinted around the clearing, making out the shapes of his 2 companions, still lying there asleep. At least he hoped they were asleep. He stood up and felt a paralyzing cramp grip his stomach. He doubled over and tried not to panic. If it were poison, you'd be dead already, he told himself out loud. They had eaten some very weird stuff. Too much, too fast, after a week of no food at all. That had to be a shock to the system, and Luke's stomach was letting him know it. An itch on his cheek took his attention from his digestion. He reached up and scratched. Bumps, at least a dozen. Bug bites all over his face. His eyelid was starting to swell. There were welts on his arms too, and the bare part of his legs below his ragged shorts. On his head, even beneath his thick brown hair. While he'd been sleeping, he had provided a banquet for the local island insects. He could hear the buzzing in his ears. He flailed his arms, but the sound didn't go away. Charla stirred and immediately curled into a ball. Oh, my stomach! What was that fruit? Cyanide? I think we just overdid it, Luke groaned. She was unconvinced. Are you sure? I'm breaking out in a rash. I itch all over. Bugs, Luke exclaimed, slapping and swatting. All at once, a thought came to him that made him forget insects and stomach cramps. Will, he exclaimed in horror. Ian sat bolt upright. He's awake. We just left him here on the beach. Well, began Charla, working hard to sound calm. It's not like he can go anywhere. I saw a wild boar tonight, Luke said breathlessly. It didn't hurt me. But Will can't defend himself. We've got to get back there. They ran through the dense brush, stumbling with heavy legs over the spaghetti of vines. Luke tried to will his feet to step higher, but he couldn't seem to summon the energy. Hold it! Charla grabbed him by the arm and stopped him. Do you remember how to find the beach? I don't. The 3 looked around, struggling to sharpen senses that were dulled by fatigue and discomfort. In the darkness, all directions seemed equally possible. I can't see it, Luke said finally. I can barely see you guys. Be quiet, ordered Ian. Now, what do you hear? I hear mosquitoes, and lots of them, moaned Charla. Let's get out of here. Listen to the silence, Ian insisted. This time, Luke fought the impulse to run from the insects that were devouring him. Instead, he forced himself to open his ears and mind. There was a buzzing, sure, against a backdrop of nothing. It seemed as loud as a squadron of planes, but slowly he became aware of other, quieter sounds. The scurrying of small nocturnal birds and animals, the rustle of the wind in palm fronds, and over it all a distant, rhythmic pounding. His brain was working in slow motion, so there was a delayed reaction. The surf, he exclaimed finally. Ian pointed. This way. A few minutes later, they broke out of the trees. Running had served to clear their heads a little. Luke offered up a high five that Charla took a weak slap at. The celebration was short-lived. An indentation in the soft sand showed the spot where Will had been lying. Their friend was nowhere to be seen. Come back for the next chapters.